Okay, we start, okay?
Okay.
Okay, arratsaldeon. A ber, txoin, garaikidetasun krisiaren inguruan antolatzen ari den hitzaldien bat izango da gaurkoa. Eta plazerra da niretzat, islaria Bruce edo Bruno Clarke hemen aurkeztea. Bea, Texaseko Teknologia Unibertsitateko katedraduna da, Paul Whitfield Horn, literatura eta zientzia saileko irakasle agurgarria edo distinguished professor, eta 2019an Bloomberg NASAko astrobiologiako katedra izan zuen Estatu Batuetako Kongresuko liburutegian. Bere ikerketak sistemen teorian, narratibaren teorian eta ekologian oinarritzen dira, eta gaur aurkeztuko duen gaiaren inguruan 2 liburu ditu. Bata deitzen da Gaian Systems, Lynn Margulis' Neo-Cybernetic and the End of the Antropocene, eta bestea da oraintxe bertan argitaratu den liburu bat, Lynn Margulis eta James Lovelock Gaia teoriaren egileen arteko korrespondentzia zientifikoa editatu eta komentatuta biltzen duen liburu bat. Bueno, bera, Euskal Herria etorri da, Euskal Herriko Unibertsitatean filosofiako departamentuan, Gaian filosofi izenarekin, egin dugun workshop batean parte hartzera. Eta bertan, orain emango duenaz gain, beste 2 hitzaldi eman ditu, biak Gaia teoriaren inguruan, eta tartean aurkeztu digu bere liburu berri hori ere. Eta, workshop horretan beste islari batzuk ere izan ditugu Gaia hipotesiaren inguruan. Zuen baimenarekin errepikatuko dut gazteleraz. Uste dut itzuliko duela Alesek esaten duana. Bueno, pues es un placer para mí presentar aquí a Bruce o Bruno Clarke, que es catedrático o distinguished professor de literatura y de ciencia en el Departamento de Inglés de la Universidad Tecnológica de Texas y que en 2019 fue además el titular de una cátedra que se llama Bloomberg NASA de astrobiología en la Biblioteca del Congreso de Estados Unidos. Su investigación se centra en la teoría de sistemas, en la teoría narrativa y ecología. Y es autor de 2 libros sobre los temas de los que va a hablar aquí. Uno que se llama Gaian Systems, Lynn Margulis' Neo-Cybernetics and the End of the Anthropocene, que yo creo que no está traducido, sobre los sistemas gaianos y Lynn Margulis y la cibernética. Y ahora es coeditor de un libro que acaban de publicar en el que se recoge la correspondencia científica entre los 2 promotores de la teoría Gaia, que son Lynn Margulis y James Lovelock, con algunos comentarios. Ese libro acaba de salir hace un par de semanas que está ya disponible en papel, y una de las charlas que nos ha ofrecido en el workshop al que ha venido, que ha sido un workshop sobre Gaia y filosofía que hemos tenido en nuestro grupo IAS Research del Departamento de Filosofía de la Universidad del País Vasco, pues ha sido la presentación de ese libro, además de otra charla sobre el sistema Gaia, y también hemos tenido otras charlas sobre aspectos distintos de esta teoría. La hipótesis Gaia, ya sabéis que es una idea que trata de pensar sobre la naturaleza de los fenómenos de coordinación y autoorganización que se dan en la Tierra a escala planetaria, y que predice que muchos de estos fenómenos están conectados y son interdependientes de una manera muy interesante que puede considerarse orgánica. Y por eso una de las tareas pendientes de la teoría es decidir si podemos o no considerar que la Tierra es un sistema viviente, y en caso de que lo sea, si tenemos que revisar y reformular algunas de las ideas que tenemos sobre qué es vida y qué hace que a algo le llamemos sistema viviente. Uno de los puntos interesantes que hemos revisado en este workshop es que entre los 2 proponentes de la idea de Gaia, James Lovelock y Lynn Margulis, hubo muchas discusiones al respecto sobre si es o no Gaia un organismo, se puede llamar así. Porque mientras Lovelock tenía cierta tendencia a usar esa metáfora o esa comparación de Gaia con un organismo viviente, en parte por sus raíces teóricas en la cibernética y también por su inspiración en los trabajos de Schrödinger sobre qué es vida, a Lynn Margulis le importaban sobre todo las relaciones y las conexiones de los microorganismos entre sí y la manera en que estas interacciones transforman el medio geológico y químico que forma de la Tierra, de forma que para ella la mayor parte de la propia geología del planeta solo puede explicarse en términos que asocien las características de la Tierra con la acción de los seres vivos y los fenómenos orgánicos. Bueno, en la charla que vamos a escuchar ahora de Bruce Clarke, os voy a hacer un pequeño spoiler, se va a referir pues mucho menos a la historia y a la filosofía de la teoría Gaia, de lo que estoy diciendo ahora, y mucho más a las consecuencias políticas y ecológicas del hecho de que debamos considerar a nuestro planeta pues, como Gaia. Y también va a referirse a nuestra naturaleza, a la de los humanos y al resto de los seres vivos y tal vez otras entidades, como seres gaianos, es decir, seres que debemos entendernos a nosotros mismos como formando parte de esa entidad organizada y tal vez orgánica que es la Tierra y que se llama, pues, desde Lovelock, Gaia. También va a referirse, Bruce, a la conveniencia y a las críticas que se hacen, o sea, si es conveniente o si hay críticas de que llamemos a la era actual Antropoceno. Bueno, ese es un poco como su comienzo. Ya sabéis que a quien le interese hay una traducción al euskera de la charla que va a dar. Por otro lado, Alex Merlo, que es nuestro mayor conocedor del tema Gaia en nuestro grupo IAS Research, y además es un traductor experimentado, va a ofreceros una traducción a quienes no quieran seguir la charla en la lengua original. Y sin más, pues ya le doy la palabra a Bruce Clarke. You have the floor, Bruce. You can start. No.
Thank you. Thank you, Arantxa. Thank you very much. Introduction. Thank you. It's quite a new experience for me to give a lecture for which a simultaneous translation is being offered. Thanks so much to my sponsor here, Alex Merlo, who's doing the translation up in the booth, and to the IAS research program at the University of the Basque Country. It's truly an honor and a unique experience to have an opportunity to speak to the public beyond the university on a topic that I think is truly of general interest, but still predominantly an academic kind of discussion with regard, for instance, to this thing called the Anthropocene, which I'll provide a short introduction or definition of as we get going. Okay, and I went to the web to look at this event before flying over to come for our seminar and workshop, and I saw that my talk had been translated possibly by the Google translator as being Gaian in the Anthropocene, which is very good as well, although literally the topic is Gaian being in the Anthropocene and the Anthropocene, which is the slogan I'm proposing as we rethink what it means to be human in the light of our contemporary situation and how we can remain, certainly we remain human, but what if we became Gaian beings as well? Or exclusively, I don't know. Gaian being and the Anthropocene. Years before the COVID-19 pandemic changed all our lives, the American evolutionary theorist and major Gaia proponent, Lynn Margulis, sized up what she called the, quote, pandemic we call progress, unquote. Composing the passage in which this phrase appears around the year 2006, she was likely already aware of the onset of what's called the Anthropocene, to name a new geological description of contemporary planetary dynamics as altered profoundly by modern human industrial and agricultural activities. But if she was aware of this new term, the Anthropocene, she was not buying into it. And in fact, the Anthropocene, or the era of purported human domination of the Earth system, could be considered as a kind of involuted presentation of what used to be called progress, quote unquote, a modern notion built on the now ironic presumption that the technological developments that have allowed humankind to conquer the globe, these developments have no precipitous downsides, no major pitfalls, no insurmountable impediments, and we moderns used to think this way, in part at least, because we also thought that the worldly environment into which all the manifestations of progress must be placed is simply out there, absorbed into a passively docile or subdued non-human nature. And despite some patches of pollution here and there, mainly where dispensable people live, the world beyond our doors, we once thought, is just an infinite sink into which the detritus of human activities tumbles without ecologically significant trace. Of course, all that was just wishful thinking. Nevertheless, many of our fellow humans at this moment remain reluctant to awake from their cozy state of oblivion regarding the exquisite and inescapable interconnectedness of planetary matters altogether. However, as Margulis wrote in that same text, where she spoke of the pandemic we call progress, she wrote, "When you do in fact come to understand Gaia, then you will know for yourself," Margulis writes, "that what has been called the Earth's environment is no externality. The environment is part of the body. Therefore, for us, humans, the talkative, lying, quarrelsome, but endlessly manipulative social ape, the disrespectful act of despoilment, the self-mutilation, the pandemic we call progress, such as deforestation, desertification, are, for Gaia, only petty activities, a masochism writ large of the mammalian kind that Gaia has seen before. Gaia continues to smile. Homo sapiens, she shrugs. soon will either change its wayward ways or, like other plague species, will terminate with a whimper in the current scourge. In the same accelerated Holocene extinction it, humanity, initiated and has sustained over the past 10,000 years. So in a Gaian view, as expressed by Margulis, the environment is not out there, rather we are inside it. Our despoilments are thus self-mutilations, because when it comes to Gaia, we must include ourselves and our works within the planetary system to be observed, however, not at all as the primary agents heralded by the notion of the Anthropocene, but rather fundamentally as distributed elements, intricately, just elements of the totality on the planet, intricately bound up with the whole system. So personifying Gaia as somewhat irritated by human annoyances, as she writes in the passage we're looking at, Margulis at that moment issued a blanket condemnation of modern anthropic folly. And just a year ago, on the occasion of COP26, that is the UN climate change conference that took place in Glasgow a year and a half ago about, Margulis's long-standing Gaia colleague, James Lovelock, issued a parting shot, and he left the planet about 6 months later. So it was one of the last things that he wrote. He issued a parting shot that evokes something like, if you will, Gaia's desperation to be done with the Anthropocene. So this is Lovelock from 2 years ago. He writes, warnings that once seemed like the doom scenarios of science fiction are now coming to pass. We are entering into a heat age in which the temperature and sea levels will be rising decade by decade until the world becomes unrecognizable. We could also be in for more surprises. Nature is nonlinear and unpredictable, never more than at a time of transition. But my fellow humans must learn to live in partnership with the earth, otherwise the rest of creation will, as part of Gaia, unconsciously move the earth to a new state in which humans may no longer be welcome. The virus, COVID-19, may well have been one negative feedback. Gaia will try harder next time with something even nastier. And it does seem that living in partnership with our planet mates is not something that most modern human beings, at least, have done all that well. For Lovelock to speculate in our present moment that COVID-19 could be one negative feedback among others likely to follow is to imagine the spread of that virus through the human population as a Gaian effort to maintain itself as a self-regulating system holding the planet all together in a state fit for the continuation of life at large, precisely by diminishing its Anthropocene agents, that is to say, you and me. So one would think that for us humans, it would certainly be preferable at this stage of affairs to rise to the occasion of perilous climate change by partnering up as Gaian beings and by mustering our own human self-regulation as a planetary participant. Now, to approach an understanding of what it could mean to be a Gaian being, I would like to turn our gaze for a while toward a level of planetary dynamics that puts the limits of human capacities into proper context. So let us contemplate water. Now, literally speaking, water is not life, although the venerable saying, water is life, certainly contains depths of wisdom, but nevertheless, literally speaking, this is a poetic or mythic statement. Water is not itself a living substance, but rather an endlessly fascinating mode of matter. In a secular view, water is the indispensable material condition and chemical medium for a planetary environment in which our kind of life is possible as it flows around the surfaces of the planet. Water wends its way through rocks and soils and living things along innumerable paths. Species, kinds, people flock where watersheds lead and languish if the water dries up. Let us consider the idea that our planet altogether is literally an aquifer, the ultimate aquifer for our world. Indeed, as this poster produced by the American Space Agency, NASA, has affirmed, the Earth is so far our only oasis in space. And the crucial point here is that this oasis, our planet itself as a global aquifer, is not at all a forever thing. Rather, it has been argued, the better part of the water ever held on Earth is still sequestered here on this planet thanks to Gaia. Thanks to Gaia's active role in keeping the planet fit for life. In other words, here on Earth, water enjoys its current abundance because it has been actively retained rather than lost to space due to the abundant presence and agency of life over geological time. Now, the Gaia theorists Stephen Harding and Lynn Margulis put this claim forward in their article, Water Gaia. Water Gaia, 3.5 thousand million years of wetness on planet Earth, where they write, we suggest that without life's involvement in complex geological, atmospheric, and metabolic processes, Earth would long ago have lost its water, becoming a dry and barren world much like Mars and Venus, unquote. According to these authors, since attaining its Gaian form, life in the aggregate has actively participated with geological processes to retain Earth's aqueous endowment, to maintain the surfaces of this planet continuously wet or moist, and precisely as such, fit for the continuation of life. Our water is still here, on, in, and above the earth, this thesis runs, because Gaia, as defined in the scientific work of Lovelock and Margulis as the planetary system that in the final instance comprehends and coordinates the operational couplings of biological and geological systems, Gaia has kept it here. Now, akin to the physical circulation of hydrological cycles themselves, the logic of the water Gaia thesis I'm presenting to you here, its logic is circular, like so. Liquid water makes life possible, so life works out ways to retain water within the Gaian system, keeping the oceans of this priceless molecule available over geological time for its own purposes of self-maintenance and differential regeneration, or what we call evolution. Now, for contrast, let's consider our neighbors Venus and Mars. Planetary scientists are largely agreed that as young planets, along with Earth, both Venus and Mars had relatively abundant water. It likely came to all three planets from the so-called heavy bombardments by water-bearing asteroids that punctuated the final accretion of the rocky planets, of all these three rocky planets, out of the solar disk some 4 billion years ago. Venus, Earth, and Mars seem to have had comparable endowments of pre-life chemistry and opportunities for vital origins. Moreover, as we were talking about earlier today in our workshop, as a young star, our sun was not as bright, perhaps 30% less luminous than now. For most of its tenure then, Venus, the planet Venus, has been within the margins of our solar system's habitable zone, as it's called. And for life to once have emerged there seems modestly plausible. To remain friendly to life, however, Venus would have needed, being that much closer even to a fainter sun, it would have needed active cooling. It could possibly have achieved and sustained such a temperate state by establishing a high albedo or index of reflectivity, sending solar energy back into space before it reached the surface, while minimizing the greenhouse gases that would have held heat in. And at the end of the habitable zone farthest from the sun, Mars would have needed the opposite, that is, active heating, to incubate any nascent life that may have formed there. For this, the red planet could have done the opposite of Venus, that is, work up a strong greenhouse atmosphere to retain surface heat and hold its albedo low so that it converted as much of its sunlight as possible into planetary warming. The point here being that astrobiologists and planetary scientists have conceived these plausible scenarios for the origin of life on planets other than Earth, even though we have credited ourselves as being in the sweet spot of the habitable zone, right? Not too far from the sun, not too close. It's just right. This is called the Goldilocks theory of life on Earth, but because we're just right. So, plausible planetary scenarios can be built for the origin and development of life on both Venus and Mars. However, and here's the point, if life did get going on either of these planets, it now seems to be gone. Moreover, and at the same time, both of our neighbors are now desiccated in the extreme. The water Gaia thesis suggests that a major factor in both planets' drift toward their present arid state has been either the sheer absence of life altogether, that it never began at all, or the unhappy loss of the early life that may have begun there, the loss of the life needed to set up the negative or regulatory Gaian feedbacks within their atmospheric regimes that allow for habitable climates sustained over geological time, their habitability predicated precisely on the retention of the water that they may have originally had but have now lost. So life here on Earth really is precious, a cosmic diamond in the infinite rough. Now, a standard explanation for the rarity or absence of robustly evolved life elsewhere in the universe is what the astrobiologists Aditya Chopra and Charles H. Lineweaver termed the emergence bottleneck, quote unquote, which means the immense physicochemical difficulties of getting life started in the first place, even in the so-called habitable zone, as determined by strictly physical criteria of solar luminosity and distance between star and planet, the complexities involved in getting a living system to emerge out of a prebiotic mix of molecules certainly seems to be massive. Yet, given the age and unfathomable immensity just of the observed universe and the now verified cosmic profusion of exoplanets, given all that, one imagines that there could have been billions and billions of trial runs for life, and we know that, lucky for us, at least one of them succeeded. However, where it may happen to get started, life's early survival and subsequent proliferation may depend upon a fortuitously rapid burst of initial growth yielding planetary modifications conducive to its continued survival. In their article called The Case for a Gaian Bottleneck, The Biology of Habitability, Chopra and Lineweaver offer a biological, the point, not just a physical, but a biological reason for the current state of non-evidence regarding life beyond Earth, what they call the Gaian bottleneck. And they explain that in this passage. They write, if life emerges on a planet, it only rarely evolves quickly enough to regulate greenhouse gases and albedo, thereby maintaining surface temperatures compatible with liquid water and habitability. Such a Gaian bottleneck suggests that, first, extinction is the cosmic default for most life that has ever emerged on the surfaces of wet, rocky planets in the universe. And two, rocky planets need to be inhabited to remain habitable. In the Gaian bottleneck model, the maintenance of planetary habitability is a property more associated with a rapid and unusually rapid evolution of biological regulation of surface volatiles than with the luminosity and distance to the host star. These are just the physical constraints of the habitable zone. So, in other words, that's Gaia. The emergence of Gaia is what is entailed by a rapid evolution of biological regulation of surface volatiles. So, as applied to Venus and Mars, the presence of a Gaian bottleneck would imply that, even granting that life managed to emerge on either planet, it failed to take control of its own fate and so died in the cradle. That is to say, it was unable to achieve either a Venusian or a Martian version of Gaia, and so clinch its own maintenance of habitability. As we've already noted, these living dynamics would have been focused on the retention of water in the liquid phase, amenable to all but the most extreme metabolisms of which we have any knowledge. So in these scenarios, extraterrestrial life in our own solar system would have suffered on Mars or Venus, the more common cosmic fate being early elimination, that is, a failure to pass through the Gaian bottleneck. Thus, when it comes to cosmological perseverance, it's not enough just for life to get going in the first place. Like infants everywhere, nascent life is the most fragile. Even as our planet developed as a rocky world with an active molten core, that is, with all of the geology present in a rocky planet, early life's own effluents and accumulated deposits reworked its geological conditions by altering its chemistry and its terrain. Proliferating species of early life had to evolve along particular pathways that furthered their own continuation and that of their neighbors. And one crucial strategy for life on this planet has been the formation of vigorous symbioses, diverse consortia of coexisting beings. On Earth, such mutualistic relations among varied life forms arose to cultivate and exploit the creative multiplicity of autopoietic possibilities. Gaia theory posits that the very diversity of life enhances its scenes of habitation. Ecological neighbors cultivating a community, a niche where they all find a place, tend to persist. With regard to water Gaia, then, we see that the Earth's hydrological cycles are much more than just water in the aggregate as it runs its planetary courses. Rather, water's global movements run around and through the organic pulsations of living systems. The water Gaia thesis is an especially powerful reminder that no earthly formation can be taken for granted, either as eternal or as independent of far wider environmental and ecological contingencies. So it would seem that Gaia has been protecting its own natural resources on its own behalf for the 3 billion years of its operation, viewing local formations against their planetary horizon than any regional aquifer, just like any single species of life, is just one among many tributaries, myriad tributaries of an Earth system whose replenishment is inextricably tied to Gaia's own self-maintenance. Okay, now that was the water Gaia part. And the point, I hope, was that we Anthropocene humans think we're so powerful. You try maintaining water on a planetary surface for 3 billion years and see how far you get, you human beings, with your presumptions of glory. Okay, just to put things in context. Now, the final section of this talk is Gaian being and Gaian time. As we noted at the beginning of this talk, through a leap of identification with Gaia's planetary perspective, Lynn Margulis saw through our human age of the Anthropocene, saw through our human age to perceive the leading edge of an extinction event. This too is an aspect of the Anthropocene epoch for which humans have indeed been the primary agents, not to our credit, though, the fact that we're responsible for the dying off of so many species that otherwise would have maintained a place on the planet. This too is an aspect of the Anthropocene epoch, and not just since the introduction of the steam engine or the nuclear age announced by the bombs dropped at Hiroshima or Nagasaki, as indicated by some Anthropocene chronologies, but at least since the recession of the last ice age. As the narrator of Kim Stanley Robinson's 2020 novel, The Ministry for the Future, asserts, and this is just news, but it's out of a novel, but it's factual enough. The current rate of extinctions compared to the geological norm is now several thousandfold faster, making this the sixth great extinction event of Earth's history, and thus the start of the Anthropocene in its clearest demarcation, which is to say, we are in a biosphere catastrophe that will be obvious in the fossil record for as long as the Earth lasts. Also, the mass extinction is one of the most obvious examples of things done by humans that cannot be undone, despite the general robustness of life on Earth. Now, in her essay titled "The Future in the Anthropocene, Extinction and the Imagination," literary theorist Clarke develops a cultural chronology of the idea of extinction, largely as that has been reflected in imaginative literature, like Robinson's novel, as well as poems and movies. These are the topics she takes up in her paper. And Kolbrook sees the conclusion of Darwin's Origin of Species back in 1859 as culminating a pre-modern tradition in which apocalyptic ends revealed the beginning of a new set of encompassing conditions. In the classical evolutionary view, for instance, in Darwin, the extinction of species cleared the field for new forms that could now have their own day in the sun. And Kolbrook writes, "What ties traditional, mythic, and pre-modern apocalyptic thought to the Darwinian conception of extinction is a notion of ends as redemptive and inhuman. Life's grandeur makes its way through forms that are an expression of a power of formation or creativity that is bound up with destruction." Now, in contrast, Anthropocene imaginations tend to be post-apocalyptic, in that here the matter of extinction typically refers exclusively to human beings and the dread over their possible lapse as a species, and even more so to the contemporary world of affluent accommodations, to those enjoying the ways of life that have the farthest to fall if the climate crisis brings the contemporary technosphere crashing down. In the literary and cinematic disaster narratives Kolbrook reviews, she writes, "The end of Western urbanity reveals nothing other than the desire to save or mourn the very world of hyperconsumption that brought about its own end and that of many others, precisely because no other form of existence counts as a world." But let us note that the place of extinction in the Gaian imagination, as brought forward by Margulis and Lovelock, would appear to go against Kolbrook's account of the typical Anthropocene construction or Anthropocene constriction of concern to the current precarious state of the developed world. The remarkable thing about their decades of Gaia discourse on the climate crisis is its higher equanimity or again, its literal evocation of a post-human condition, while the Gaian view does not return to anything like the scriptural tones of Darwin's evocation of evolutionary grandeur, nor does the notion of redemption have a place in their thinking. Nevertheless, the Gaian view on extinction does restore the primary themes of continuation under altered circumstances. As we heard Margulis state unequivocally in 2006, even looking out at the pandemic we call progress, Margulis wrote, Gaia continues to smile, even when confronting the prospect of, in Lovelock's words, you'll recall, quote, a new state in which humans may no longer be welcome, unquote. So what we see is that in the Gaian view, apocalypse is not utter disaster, but radical transformation. It is a disaster and a dead end only for those forms of life whose depredations upon other life forms have also rendered them no longer viable within the changed conditions they have brought upon themselves. Nevertheless, in the terms laid out by Colebrook, future human life in a planetary ecology of radically diminished biodiversity certainly would be post-apocalyptic. That is, we might save a remnant of ourselves, of our human selves, but still come to the end of the world as we know it. In a recent lecture, the same novelist, Kim Stanley Robinson, framed his view on the calamity of the current extinction event as a crime against both humanity and nature at once. He stated in this lecture that's up on the web, human extinction is not quite possible given our cleverness and our ability to get by. We could have mass deaths. We could lose a big percentage of humanity, and it would be a disaster and a crime forever, but it wouldn't be extinction for us. It's the other species. That's the crime we can't come back from. Now, against these somber vistas of guilt and remorse, I want to suggest that Gaia, the idea of Gaia, the discourse of Gaia, Gaia, the reality of Gaia, extends a steadying hand and a long view whose non-human durations could calm our ambient madness of the moment. In this extended moment of Anthropocene desperation, it could help to some small degree to have a Gaian perspective on the past extinction events that have punctuated the pre-human eons. After all, the current extinction event is the 6th to have hit this planet over the tenure of life altogether. And we're still here. As Dorian Sagan reminds us, He writes, Gaia is essentially a microbe-based system that has come roaring back after several mass extinctions and appears to be able to take care of itself through complex feedbacks, unquote. But of course, Gaian time is measured in many millions of years, and so the temporality of such recoveries is itself Gaian, not human. However, time measured on the human scale could encompass a complementary view toward the post-human condition to follow upon the Anthropocene event. That is, for those who arrive there, it need not be a state of utter desolation. Rather, it could be the arrival of a general realization of Gaian being. So one way or another, I propose, where human being in all the supposititious glory of its distinction from the rest of life has been, there Gaian being shall be, in settled acknowledgement of its dependence upon the flourishing of the biosphere altogether and of its obligatory participation with non-human life and non-organic earth. Gaian being denotes planetary solidarity in whatever way we resolve or accommodate self-inflicted Anthropocene threats to our collective existence as a species or botch that job. The Gaian system will hold on as long as cosmologically possible, seeking out and buffering a planetary state of general viability that plays no favorites. In this view, the supreme value is the continuation of the life that has arisen on the earth and taken the planet to itself, its continuation right here, not on Mars or God knows where, right here on the same earth, in whatever form can keep that alliance, that Gaian alliance going. So, Elon Musk to the contrary, whatever, off-planet adventures can wait until a post-Anthropocene humanity gets right with Gaia and so stabilizes its own long-term survival prospects. Just a little bit more now. So, as the Anthropocene event plays out, massive and difficult adjustments will be necessary to realign our ways of life in concert with Gaia's symbiotic contingencies. The Gaian beings, I envision, will ally their planetary cognition with the positivity of their own mortality. Let's try that again. The Gaian beings, I envision, will ally their planetary cognition and the positivity of their own mortality with the cosmological longevity of the Gaian system. In this sense, the state of Gaian being complements the evocation of planetary compost in the writings of the renowned feminist theorist Donna Haraway, akin to Colebrooke's Darwinian evocation of Gaian time as, quote, an expression of a power for formation or creativity that is bound up with destruction, unquote. For Haraway, the post-human condition itself merges into a matrix of inorganic and post-organic constituents decomposing and recomposing forms. And here's how Donna Haraway puts it. We are not post-human, we are compost. We are not homo, we are humus. We are Terran, we are earthlings, we are many, we are indeterminate. We bleed into each other in chaotic fluid extravagance. We eat our own snaky tails in symphoidic whorls to generate polymorphic ongoingness. We are enmeshed with the uruberoi of diverse interlaced netherworlds. We are chthonic, of and for the earth, of and for its unfinished times. We live and die in its ruins. So, raise your right hand and pledge with me. Let us determine to call this Gaian being to come into being by reorganizing human being around an inextricable immersion in Gaian cycles of life and death. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. It was a very stimulating talk. And it's now time for questions. Podemos pensar ya y hacer comentarios o preguntas. Bueno, ya tenemos una.
Sí. Thank you very much for your talk. It's an excellent one. Voy a hablar en castellano para expresarme con mayor precisión. Bueno, durante casi toda la conferencia se ha hablado en Gaiano en singular y al final de la conferencia se ha hablado en plural. Y yo sería claramente partidario de lo segundo. No hay un Gaiano singular, no puede haberlo. La hipótesis de Gaia implica complejidad, interacción. Entonces, este sería mi primer comentario, que ya veo que está usted de acuerdo por sus gestos, ¿no? Entonces, mi pregunta, cuando usted ha hablado de Gaian Being en Gaian Time, mi pregunta sería por el plural del tiempo también. O sea, es decir, Gaia, ¿hay un único tiempo gaiano o como yo más bien tendería a pensar, hay varios tiempos gaianos? Me explico. Yo acabo de estar en la Patagonia y allí quedan restos fósiles de 5 glaciaciones y por lo tanto de 5 extinciones, ¿no? Todavía no ha llegado el Antropoceno a la Patagonia, todavía. Se va acercando, ¿no? Y como tiene una reserva de agua que es la tercera del mundo, en breve todas las grandes empresas comprarán los glaciares para extraer agua de ellos y llevarla pues al desierto para los campeonatos mundiales de fútbol, o sea, por ejemplo, ¿no? O sea, y esto es el Antropoceno, ¿no? Bien, la capacidad destructiva del ser humano está suficientemente acreditada, bien. Pero yo creo, yo soy muy entusiasta de Donna Haraway y el texto final es muy bello, pero allí en la Patagonia se veía cuando se retira el glaciar, y aparece algo de roca, aparece roca, pero hay luminosidad, hay energía solar, entonces brota inmediatamente la vida en forma de líquenes, y brota por simbiosis de algas y hongos, hongos, microorganismos, ¿no? Bien. Entonces esto pues, está completamente de acuerdo con la teoría de Margulis, de la cual yo soy un gran entusiasta de la teoría de la simbiogénesis, pero digamos la cuestión es que no brota del humus. Es muy bella la imagen literaria de Donna Haraway, pero científicamente falsa. Si uno va a la Patagonia, surgen las plantas, efectivamente, y plantas casi como las que aparecía en la imagen, pero no del humus, surgen de la piedra directamente. O sea, la formación del humus es mucho más lenta. Habrá millones de años hasta que se forma el humus, y por lo tanto me parece muy bello, muy romántica la metáfora de Lynn Margulis y también la imagen, pero creo que habría que investigar más científicamente lo duro que es un territorio rocoso, con 5 glaciaciones, y en donde muy probablemente por efecto del Antropoceno pues habrá una extinción masiva, pero en cualquier caso el cómo resurge la vida surge muy darwinianamente, muy margulianamente, es decir, por simbiogénesis, pero de formas muy elementales de vida, y el humus es una forma muy compleja, la tierra es algo muy complejo, hasta que hay tierra en la Patagonia tienen que pasar muchísimas décadas, cientos de años, ¿no? y solo hay líquenes, hay pequeños microorganismos, ¿no? Entonces yo recomiendo encarecidamente viajar a la Patagonia, contemplar las 5 glaciaciones y aprenderemos que hay varios tiempos en Gaia y no uno solo.
Thank you. I find myself in agreement with all of your critique. You allow me to see my own propensity, that is, so that as I meditate on the ideas that come to me, Gaian being occurs in its sort of hypostatized universality, which is kind of an old metaphysical habit. I certainly would not dispute that that in the concreteness of that phenomenon, it will be as multiple. It will be a profusion of beings finding their way in the consortia that are possible under the conditions that pertain as we enter these transformed states that we anticipate coming out of the current changes that are going on around us. So I'm happy to accept that revision. I hadn't paused to think about, as I listened to your critique of Haraway's metaphor of compost, of humus, I thought, well, yes, I suppose given the geological depths out of which life emerges, out of which it has emerged, out of the unfathomable revolutions of the geology of the planet in interaction with a biota that arises and then is beat back down to some extent and arises again and evolves through all the sort of various traumas that led to these multiple extinction events. So humus and compost now, they're certainly, they're metaphors. I think what attracted me to them is, but they're, yes, I would accept that there's a superficiality to the layer that they envision of humus or compost just being some soil, that a deposit of soil that's not really very deep relative to how deep down life goes into the earth, and from the depths from which life can reemerge, not necessarily. So I was thinking more of the humus. We are not humans, we are humus, but it is to, it's dust to dust, right? That is, in other words, what attracted me is the rethinking of death as something positive. The positivity of our mortality, that's the phrase I use. The positivity of mortality. We're all going to die. We can have good deaths, we can have terrible deaths, we can die for no good reason, we can be caught up in insane conflicts and be killed by horrible... I was walking along the beach on Wednesday, and there was a man with a stick making prayers for Ukraine in the sand. Well, that's death. That's bad death. But to me, the humus was just, that's the soil in which we are interred when we're buried. And it's when we go back to become part of the humus, that's not a bad thing, because it's a Gaian thing. That is, the elements of our bodies will return to the cycles out of which new life come back. And that's the positivity of our mortality. But what you evoke in your landscape of Patagonia is really dives down to a more elemental, microcosmic understanding of the tenacity of life in what we would consider the harshest possible environments, that bacteria, but life thrives there, can thrive there, and given, we don't want to see the glaciers deplete our watersheds, which is happening, of course. The water is going somewhere else, and not into our aquifers, into our regional aquifers, where we would hope to have access to it for our own human needs. But you don't necessarily need the humus in which plant life, the sort of the green earth of profuse plant life that is a common image of a verdant world. That's beautiful, and that's one part of the picture, but you evoked this kind of tenacity of the most obscure parts of the biosphere, and they come back as well, or when they just need a little sunlight if to come down to their netherworld to return in their own profusion. So I entirely agree that yes, let's pluralize Gaian times as the in a recognition of the not only the the many eons that have come and gone, rendering the earth in variously different formations, each its own eon. Okay, so you've got many Gaian eons. I simply meant that when Dorian says, "Don't worry, Gaia will bounce back no matter what we do," it will bounce back, but it'll take millions of years, or at least it'll take much longer than our human sense of time can tolerate as a horizon of anticipation. So my point was just simply that Gaian time is cosmological, geological, whereas we upstart human beings measure time in hours and days. And that's just not enough time for Gaia to repair our damage soon enough for us to not worry about the damage we've done. So we need to stop acting. If we put our behavior in the context of the time it takes to restore an ecosystem, that's all the more impetus to change the way we behave. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was very, very interesting. So I'm in general very sympathetic to the Gaian perspective. I'm just wondering what you think it contributes at the moment to sort of tackling the climate crisis, because on an unsympathetic understanding you might think it kind of suggests a kind of laissez-faire of, whatever we do, Gaia is going to be fine. Whereas to me, the truth is really that it's in human hands what happens. We have the solutions to all our problems. It's just that we don't act. And I'm sort of worried that thinking in these Gaian terms is kind of an excuse to deflect our responsibility and our capacity for changing the way we live.
Thank you for that. I think you articulate a real way that, to me, the message that I find in Gaia and try to express can be taken the wrong way. I mean, in the end, one might only be left with a philosophical attitude as with regard to, we blew it, but the planet will survive. That isn't really especially satisfying. To me, the Gaian discourse, what I see made available by the Gaian perspective really is the understanding of the interconnectedness and symbiotic, that fecundity and viability needs the collaboration of as many life forms as we can get together in the project. And so we put ourselves in against that tableau. And so I just listened to Lovelock saying, we need to stop, we need to let go of our dream of domination, which is a fantasy anyways, and figure out how we're going to participate with the biosphere. So to me, the message to be received is one that moves us in some form or another into the into these remediating activities, however that one fashions that for oneself. And for me, as a professor and a person of language and words, and I mean, I hope what I'm doing here on this stage tonight is my contribution to that process, for how it's, for what others may decide, the activism that one may determine for oneself is, I wouldn't want to dictate to anyone what path they might find in this process. But I just think, so if someone says, Gaia, Gaia will, I mean, in a way, this particular criticism of Gaia was part of, it's always been part of the critique. And it makes sense why you would want to hold the Gaian advocate's feet to the fire to say, but no, that's not really how to construe the message of Gaia as a reason to blow off one's responsibility to live in a sustainable way, or help right the wrongs that we've done to the planet. Okay. Thank you.
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias por brindarnos este panorama sobre conocimientos concretos respecto a la biología que no escuchamos fácilmente, y también por hacer una propuesta vital, aún sin haber podido responder a la pregunta inicial de qué es la vida. Finalmente es una pregunta que permanece abierta y que fue una pregunta que se planteó Sigmund Freud y llegó precisamente a postular dos pulsiones, las pulsiones de vida y pulsiones de muerte, que posteriormente fueron vinculadas a la existencia del ser humano como ser hablante, es decir, que el humus es el lenguaje, y el lenguaje nos convierte en una especie distinta, es decir, una especie que no trabaja para adaptarse, es una especie que puede trabajar para su propia destrucción. Pero también hay alternativas. El problema es que no es muy fácil concebir alternativas grupales. Por eso la experiencia del psicoanálisis es una experiencia individual. Es decir, alguien puede contrariar, y me permito usar el concepto inconsciente porque lo mencionó como vinculado a Gaia. Es decir, alguien puede contrariar su tendencia inconsciente a su propia extinción con un trabajo personal, pero no se puede hacer esto a nivel global. Entonces, la pregunta sería, ¿cómo podemos ser freudianos y gaianos a la vez?
I'm sorry, how can we be Freudian. Oh,
and Gaian at the
goodness.
same time.
How can we be Freudian and Gaian at the same time? Wow. Yes. Well, where's Jacques Lacan when you need him? Man, what a wonderful question. Well, now, the psyche, Freud's description of the psyche is, yeah, I studied that for a long time back in, a while back. The death drive is a fascinating concept, often related to entropy, or as a kind of echo of entropy as it emerges. But at the same time, I think if I recall Freud correctly, the death drive is a uniquely human dynamic because of our imbrication with language that is which is perhaps the crucial difference between human being and non-human being. Something that our planet, our non-human life forms aren't driven, drives that they don't have to deal with. So to me then, I conceive my activity as communicating this message, a message like the one I gave tonight, because once I put these words out to this audience, we're not talking, we're into the social. And so, and you may or may not make anything of my articulations, but this arena is not necessarily, does not need to be death-driven, as that may be a contingency of private psychic life or unconscious motivation. Nevertheless, we have to carry on in our waking activities with living quote unquote, living purposes, life-affirming purposes, and so how do you get beyond the death drive? Jenseits des Todesprinzip, or whatever the hell it was in German. Eros, baby. Thanatos will take care of itself. Symbiosis is Eros, planetary Eros. It's the aggregative function. And the way humans have to do it is by speaking out to each other and listening to what others say. Exactly what we're doing, I hope, this evening. So that's where I think, yes. So I just think Freud's not enough to me. I think that is. Freud's discourse concerns the double binds of individual psychology. No? Okay. Not right? At least most profoundly, it seems to me that that we can recover our aggregative, communal, erotic, desiring selves contra the death drive, and we might as well do it because, that seems the more lively way to go. Okay.
So I would ask you, Bruce, for you, only humans are Gaian beings, or would you say that mountains, rivers, viruses, other creatures are Gaian as well?
Oh, well, they don't need to come back into Gaian beinghood. That is to say, no, again, the human being is a deviation from Gaian being. I guess maybe that would be, and possibly because of these Freudian dynamics that my interlocutor, or at least that would be part of the explanation of our, at least in our modern kind of individualistic Western paradigm of sort of individualism, or the projection of that individualism onto the various social pathologies, or even the structures of desire that lead the wealth extractors and the neoliberal capitalists to conceive their private good as the supreme good. So that's all. That's part of the see. I don't really. I mean, I'm happy to grant being broadly, but I don't really think about inorganic being, although I'm happy for mountains and rivers. I mean, I think it's absolutely positive that insofar as we are in the midst of an anthropological recovery of indigenous ways of knowing that seem to have not departed from what I call their Gaian being, this is part of the movement that we need to make. So.
Yeah, but my problem is that I agree a little bit with Mirko's critique when he was talking about responsibilities, and I have the impression that you're stressing of the habitability of the planet, that is something that the Gaia has provided for and cared for, is in some sense a displacement of responsibilities, and it can be difficult to think of the very, very essence of Gaia as a connection of lots of different entities and self-organization if we say that the habitability is provided by Gaia and not by those connections. So I think there is some sort of danger in the possibility in being too mystical.
Okay. I suppose.
Or is it that we really need to use those values in a naturalized way to think science in a different way? Is that why are you using those mystical terms very often that seem to displace responsibility? Is it because we have to...
Which terms? I mean, Gaia as a mystical term? Is that
the habitability as something that is provided by Gaia, for example.
Well, I think of them as I thought my intention was to understand those as I mean they're broad paradigms as concepts, but I think of them very concretely. habitability as, I mean, to me that's concomitant with the phenomenon of broad, I mean, just of the thriving of life in all its forms. Habitability is the condition of the possibility of that thriving. So that, now we can then break that down into, well, you need some water, you need some nutrients, you need an atmosphere that's not toxic. I don't quite, hopefully my evocation of that is not metaphysical or mystical. I don't intend it to be anyways.
Thank you. We have some time? Yeah, okay.
Sí, escuchando esto que está saliendo ahora, a mí me viene por una parte una acusación de lo místico y por otra parte me viene hay que hacer algo, no sé si llamarlo político, una organización. Y entonces me salta una palabra que he escuchado, un concepto que he escuchado una y otra vez, no sé si tiene sentido o no, pero tengo ganas de decirlo, y es la pandemia del progreso. Hacer, construir, y vivimos con una pandemia, la pandemia del progreso. Eso me está ahí,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question. Was there a question? No? Okay. Just a comment. Thank you.
The question would be, what can we do to stop that kind of pandemics, I think. Yes, in political terms, for example.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, but I don't have a political prescription. I'm not a political prescriber. But I hope that, so that's what I want you to do. Take whatever stimulation or connection you might find in what I have to say and see how that might motivate or send you in a direction where you find your power to move things in the right direction.
A ver si he entendido bien. El ser gaiano, el hombre o la mujer gaiana, en realidad es el que vive, piensa y actúa de una forma determinada. Es eso, ¿verdad? Para no destrozar el mundo. Es eso, ¿verdad? Así de sencillo.
That's perfectly workable version of what I think I'm trying to say. I mean, again, in a non-prescriptive way, because there must be an more or less infinite number of ways to be a Gaian being, but it means to, I think, but I mean, turned around, it implies that human being, as we have conceptualized our own essence as our own species being, as in the traditional, or at least in the I would not necessarily the utterly traditional, but what's become endemic for Western sort of post-Renaissance or post-Enlightenment modernity in the West, just to bring it here to our our European and North American manifestations. Human beings, that is, we have been subscribers to a vision of humanism as around ideals of rationality and universality and other beautiful concepts, when at the same time we look out at the depredations of coloniality around the rest of the world, and the power plays that one people has wreaked on another, and we say, well, that is, so who was it? Walter Benjamin says there's no document of humanism that isn't at the same time a document of barbarity. That's a botched quote, but that's the idea, that humanism has been a kind of cover story for a willfulness of domination of one set of people over another set of people. Gaian being is at least going to be, or let me now put it this way, a person that coalesces their Gaian being will veer away from that kind of power game or desire for domination, but rather will seek accommodation, participation, communication, communality, and the cultivation of habitability, of space for mutual living. But please find your own Gaian being, and then tell us how it works for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Bruce. We have time for a last question. If someone has something, or comment, or otherwise, we can, I think, finish here. We have had an interesting conversation, I think. I would like to thank the speaker. He was really stimulating.
Thank you. My pleasure.